Hello everyone. Recently I've been using and loving the Olympus or the OM Digital Solutions, which is a weird name, but whatever. OM1, and there have been some people who have reached out to me asking about the high resolution modes. Are they very useful? Are they powerful? And so this video is my response to some of the people that have questions about this. The first thing I need to make sure people know is that the high resolution modes do not in any way make up for the resolution difference between something like the OM1 and larger sensors with higher resolution. You can get amazing results with the high resolution modes on the Om-1, but they always come with some issues that you have to sort out when you're out in the field shooting. So let me just say this. The Om-1 is marketed as the ultimate professional adventure and travel camera. I think it's absolutely fantastic in this context. However, for those of you who are considering the Om-1 and maybe some other micro four thirds cameras for outdoor high resolution modes to kind of cheat their way into having a smaller and lighter camera with more resolution, it's probably going to disappoint you. So let's talk about some specifics. The Om-1 has two high res modes. The first is a 50 megapixel handheld mode, which the camera uses small bits of camera movement to combine multiple images into one larger 50 megapixel image by some kind of magic that I don't even understand, but it does it. It does it in the camera too. And the second mode is a in camera as well, tripod only 80 megapixel mode with sensor shift technology, where the camera is literally moving the sensor around to create multiple shots into an 80 megapixel combination monster file. And it's pretty, at its best, it looks amazing. Both of these modes have some things for us to consider. The main enemy of this stuff is any kind of wind or movement. You can see here, for instance, that the wind is moving quite a bit, and that results in an error. That just tells us that the Om-1 cannot handle the scene at all. This is the handheld mode. And even in this shot, with a limited amount of wind, I'm getting some weird artifacts. If I zoom in, you could check out the background here. It has some strange geometric shapes in the out of focus areas, which is honestly kind of weird and surprising. And it just doesn't look very good to me at all. And here, when you get in close, you could see some of the ghosting around the edges of the petals, which again bothers me. And it isn't very useful because the entire reason I'm using these modes is to print stuff bigger, right? And that would be something that would be apparent in a giant print. What I've learned throughout all this is that with the 50 megapixel mode, I've had much more luck with very high shutter speeds. The camera can blast away at these high shutter speeds and then combine the image in camera to produce decent results. So if you want the most out of the handheld high resolution mode, you'll likely want to shoot at fast shutter speeds and in as little wind conditions as possible to get the best results. So for instance, this is an example. This photograph was taken in near perfect conditions using the handheld high resolution modes. It looks very good. If you zoom in, that's very nice detail, and it is more powerful. The image has a little bit more punch than the 20 megapixel mode. You can crop in a little bit and you can get away with a bigger print with higher detail. And for the 80 megapixel mode, I found that very fast shutter speeds just aren't quite as useful. Unlike the 50 megapixel mode, which will sometimes refuse to combine the images at all and give you an error, the 80 megapixel mode will combine things no matter what, and you can kind of use that to your advantage. Here I'm shooting this rock, which is stationary of course, and the water is moving all over the place really fast around it. I can slow my shutter speed down and get a really strong 80 megapixel photo with the rock and moss with a lot of detail. A lot of power is here. The colors look fantastic too. While the surrounding water also looks really good. It's that natural slow shutter speed blur. This is going to be a really fantastic big print. And here is another scene with the 80 megapixel tripod mode. And at first glance, it looks great. I'm using a fast shutter speed though. When you dive in and look at some of the areas where there's movement, you're gonna see some artifacts. And if you were going to print this really big, I think personally that these would be a little bit distracting. But when I'm using slower shutter speeds, these artifacts tend to disappear. But you have to be ready to accept some blur in your photograph, which some people might or might not want to do. So outside, in almost any condition where things are moving around, the Om-1 will struggle to get you the acceptable high resolution images that you might want. It's possible in some of the situations we've talked about before, but honestly, it's still hit or miss when you're out in the field. Even sometimes a little bit of wind can trick things up. So my answer to those of you who say you need consistent high resolution images in many different types of conditions, then the Om-1 is just not for you. And that's okay. There's a lot of choices out there, right? It's this very reason I also have the GFX system with me most of the time, because I absolutely need the ability to get ultra high resolution shots in any condition like you can see here. This shot with the GFX 100 is exactly like I want it to be, with everything sharp throughout the scene and every aspect taking advantage of the extremely high resolution of the GFX. This was actually taken in strong winds, and the Om-1, because the wind was moving around so much, it probably wouldn't even be able to get an acceptable 50 megapixel shot even with fast shutter speeds. Instead, I'd probably get an error or a completely messed up image that had a bunch of artifacts. And inside, in studio conditions, the Om-1 absolutely hits home runs with the 80 megapixel mode. Here's a photo of an agate I took in the studio using a tripod and the high-res mode with the Olympus 30mm macro, and it's absolutely fantastic. The image does compete with much larger sensors in conditions like this. Check out this detail, it is absolutely stunning. And getting this level of magnification out of a lens that I only paid $50 for used is like seriously wildly impressive. So there are specific use cases where the Om-1 and their high resolution modes really do shine. But honestly, for the price of this camera, if you're gonna be working in studio conditions, and this camera probably just isn't for you. Again, the entire allure of the Om-1 and Micro Four Thirds as a system is the ability to go light and small, which honestly in the studio, using a tripod doesn't matter nearly as much. So I guess what I'm actually trying to say is that the answer to some of the people who are asking me if the high resolution modes are really useful, the answer is it depends. And for most people, in many conditions, there's probably just a little bit too much hassle to get really good results, to get acceptable results using these modes. Am I glad that the modes exist? Absolutely. And I've learned through months of trial and error how to get the most out of these modes. But my advice for those of you who know you need more resolution than what the Om-1 has, then you should choose a different camera. It's just really kind of that simple. I do love using this thing, and it can give us options in different situations that we normally wouldn't have, but it just doesn't work all the time. And I will have to say one final thing. For most people, for probably 90% of the people that I ever taught, like I taught at a camera store for a couple years, and I taught hundreds and hundreds of students. And when I would ask everyone, what are you doing with your photographs? Almost everyone would say they're just sharing them on Facebook or Instagram. And almost all the time, the largest print that people would talk about printing would be like, you know, a 16 by 20 or something like that. And the Om-1 in any of those situations would be a fantastic camera. The only time that you need these high resolution modes, most of the time, is if you have specific projects or specific things in mind that you're going to blow stuff up really big. And the Om-1 can do some of that, but it just can't do it consistently in the field. And if you need that, you should choose something else, right? So that's just one of those things. So if you have any other questions, go ahead and ask me. I hope I explained most of this. You know, there are some things about using the high-res modes. It helps a little bit with noise, a little bit here and there too. But I've just found it a little bit too limited to wholly recommend as a system seller to be able to use those high resolution modes consistently. So again, questions, throw them below. Have a wonderful day.